Sega.
Crackdown is a top-down shooting game where two soldiers, the improbably named Ben Breaker and Andy Attacker, go after a mad scientist who's trying to take over the world with cyborgs, robot monkeys and a devil goat. Another fun game with a ridiculous concept. Let's go! First, we'll take a look at the 1989 arcade original running on Sega's System 24 board. I'll emulate this using MAME. Then we'll compare it to the 1990 PC-DOS port running in DOSBox to see how close it gets to the arcade. Sega's Crackdown ran on their new medium-resolution System 24 hardware, more powerful than the earlier System 16 board. It also used a floppy disk for the game data, so games could be swapped out reasonably easily. The arcade version boots up with a pretty System 24 logo before going into the high score table. You then see some graffiti that turns out to be the game name.
Crackdown.
An animated sequence then explains the evil leader's plans, including the devil goat. Your heroes and bomb are then introduced. Then we get a demo of the first stage in two-player mode. The basic game mechanics are explained here. In short, you travel around dropping bombs, then leave the level and it all explodes. The map shows how many stages there are before the intro sequence repeats. A second demo shows the somewhat iconic scrapyard level, and a third demo shows a stage with collapsing floors and the use of a super bomb to wipe out a large number of foes. The fourth and final demo shows a stage with moving conveyor belts to add to the difficulty. The game is pretty hard as it is though. When you start a game, you get this intro sequence. Before we look at some gameplay though, it's worth pointing out the current System 24 emulation in MAME isn't perfect graphically. These shots from MAME testers show some of the incorrect assets. How they should look is on the right. Here the title screen is black in emulation, but should be purple. The intro bomb sequence is missing the white, so you can't see the information about the bomb. Bombs in the game should have a grey background. The intro should have a purple sky. The bomb on the intro should have a red background. In short, some background colours are missing, which sometimes makes part of the map see-through amongst other things. But let's get on to gameplay. Here I'm playing as Ben Breaker. You can see how you can pin yourself to walls in order to evade bullets. Make your way to the X's shown on the map at the top to place a bomb on each X. You need to do this before the timer at the top runs out. Once all three are placed, escape, and everything blows up. Act 2 is this underground stage with some tougher bad guys, and I start to lose lives, which will become a theme. But being an arcade game, you can always insert more credits to carry on. Act 3 moves you to a base over some fast-flowing streams, and more lives lost. Flamethrowers make the fight more tricky too. You can pick up a nice rocket launcher though. Here's a super bomb. And then I go for a swim. Whoops. Eventually I clear this one. Act 4 is the final stage of Scene 1 and is in a futuristic looking base with lots of tough rooms to clear. This includes a large room at the end with teleporting bad guys appearing everywhere. Once you clear this level, you see an animation of the heroes escaping. Scene 2's first act is in a scrapyard. This is a fairly memorable stage with bad guys jumping out of cars and demolition balls to avoid too. I'm not sure the black pixels on the floor are quite correct though, possibly another emulation bug. Opening floor panels need avoiding, and then you're through. Act 2 is possibly a warehouse, Bad guys have shields now, so you'll have to get close and personal to take them out. You'll also find the first robot monkey. After this stage, you move on to Act 3 with danger signs. I see why. Once again, there are tougher opponents and flamethrowers here. Plus an advert for Pray Boy. It's related to the church, obviously. Act 4 is tricky and feels a lot like Gauntlet, which was likely an inspiration for this game, though the developer likens it to his previous game, Shinobi, but from a top-down view. The super bomb even uses the same sound effect as Shinobi's magic attacks. The middle part of this act is a maze, requiring you to glance at the map to find out where you're going next. The final part sees you trying to avoid sparks from a giant System 24 board. I didn't realise you could attack these with super bombs, and after a few deaths decided that was enough for this game. Now watch a minute of this game so you can hear how the game sounds without me talking over it. The PC-DOS version released a year after the arcade. Most videos of this one on YouTube show it with bleep chip sound, but you should seek out the full version as it allows adlib sound, which I'll use in this video. When you boot it up, there's a text code protection screen. Luckily, the manual with codes in is available online. Check the description under this video to find it. The first time you boot up, you can select a video mode, audio and controls. Here you can calibrate a joystick. The intro on the PC version is very simple, consisting of a picture of the heroes and the Crackdown title screen. When you start the game, there's a recreation of the arcade's intro sequence, but just using stills, in a different order. And you can see it's programmed by Joe Peter. The DOS version allows you to choose a speed for the gameplay using the F5 and F6 keys. This means you can have stupidly fast and unplayable gameplay, or extremely jerky and slow. In this video I'll pick a medium speed which moves around the level at a similar pace to the arcade, though it's not as smooth. The first thing to notice about the PC-DOS version is that the music is great, as long as you have adlib sound selected. But the music does play notably faster than the arcade, and the levels often use a different order of tunes to the arcade original. Scene 1's first act, called Act 0 here, plays out much like the arcade, but you have a lot more lives, a full stock of smart bombs, there are much less enemies, and they're easier to defeat. Overall, the DOS version is a lot easier than the arcade. Sadly, at the end of the act, there's no huge explosion, just a sound effect. Act 2 is again easier than the arcade with less enemies, but I still managed to lose the odd life. There's only one smart bomb effect in this game though. The third act brings in a much later tune from the arcade, and it's amazingly catchy here. Again, the enemies are easier to kill and a bit less varied than the arcade. Act 4 follows the same approach, easier than the arcade, but also a bit more tricky to play due to the stuttery movement. The teleporting enemies at the end are fewer in number and block your path much less. There's no animated cutscene before the scrapyard level, Scene 2's first act. This is, once again, fairly authentic to the arcade, but the demolition balls look weird as they lack a chain connecting them to the crane. Disappointingly, the opening floor panels are also missing, so this part is a fair bit easier too. Act 2's warehouse is again much like the arcade. The robot monkeys are a lot bigger here though, but somewhat less active. I only just made this level with 23 seconds left. Act 3's collapsing floors are present and correct, and possibly make this level even slower than the others. Also, the Pray Boy sign is now, Eat at Joe's? Maybe a nod to the developer's name. Act 4 is the complicated maze-like level. Again, it's a lot easier than the arcade in the early section, but the maze still requires you to check the map to see where to go. The System 24 board at the end has far fewer sparks, but I still found it tricky and decided to end the game here like the arcade original. Now, have a listen to a minute of this version, particularly the epic interpretations of the music. Let's compare both games at the pixel level. I should add that the arcade actually outputs the image slightly narrower than I've captured here, but I wanted both to be at the 4:3 aspect ratio, as that's how screens tend to display them. First, here's the start of the first scene in 2-player mode. Wiping across to the DOS version, you can see how each view is much more zoomed in, and the colours, despite being 256 colour VGA, take a hit. The second act on the arcade starts in a tunnel. Wiping across to the DOS version, it's so zoomed in you can't tell it's a tunnel anymore. Here's the third act with its river, and the DOS version doesn't look too far off, despite all the graphics having to be redrawn by hand, as there were no tools for porting them from the arcade original back when it was made. The fourth act's cyber level looks clean and clinical, and the DOS port looks very close. Finally, here's the start of the second scene with the scrapyard level. As I said earlier, I'm not 100% sure the black parts on the ground are quite the right colour here. Wiping across to the DOS version, and you can see once again it's pretty faithful, with the wrecked cars looking spot on. Let's put both versions head to head. I'll compare sequences from several levels. The arcade version of Crackdown was an original, challenging game that's probably best appreciated in 2-player mode with a friend. The DOS port is a faithful recreation, but the jerky movement holds it back somewhat, and it's a lot easier than the arcade, but the music is much more epic. If you like this comparison of Crackdown, then give it a like, or subscribe, ring the bell, etc. in order to find out when I've uploaded something new. And join me next time for a classic Sega puzzle game that wasn't originally a Sega game at all.